Hi, Carol. Can you hear me okay? Oops. Uh-oh. Oh. Let me know when you hear me. Okay, it's just a little bit of like a 10-second lag. Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. This is Nasha. So welcome to the brain balancing webinar. Today, we are going to talk mainly about overcoming depression and anxiety naturally. Right. So a little bit about me to start with. I am a scientist and I'm working on cancer research. This is my full-time job. I'm working making fluorescent worms as part of a cancer research project. One of the things about being a scientist is that it really trains me to solve very difficult problems because 99% of the time, or maybe a little bit better, 90% of the time, the experiments just don't work out. So I have to get really good at like just thinking about what could be the problem. And I use that to apply to my health as well, because I have a struggle with my health since I was really young. I was a chubby child up until 2 years ago when I got into bodybuilding. But there was a problem with that as well because none of my experiments had been working for about 2 years by then. And I was working out like 12 hours a week and dieting, and I got really lean. But at the same time, I became really depressed. I could not get out of bed. I couldn't get to work. I was so tired and I was covered with eczema. So I knew then that diet and exercise was not everything. And that's how I got into holistic nutrition. This is how I learned about the importance of eating real foods and making sure that we have a good, wholesome diet. But I also learned that that wasn't everything either, because that alone wasn't resolving the health issues that I had. So I decided to get into health detective work that is called functional diagnostic nutrition, right? Okay, so now let's jump into the juicy stuff. Before we talk about brain imbalances, I have to introduce the brain to you, right? The brain is the blob of fat with neurons and immune cells, the glial cell. It does have like its own immune system, and it's the blob of a lot of neuronal cells with their insulation that I will talk about in the next slide. Some nerve cells can be really long that you can have the cell body in the head and then the process the rest of the cell in the legs. So it can be really long. If you can see in this slide that the brain is connected to everything, right? It controls all the organs in the body, and it also receives the signals from the rest of the system, because the foods that we have, the hormones that we generate, is also giving feedback into the brain. So if you have unhealthy brain, as in depression and anxiety, it is very unlikely that you are actually entirely happy or entirely healthy. That's what I say. Yeah. The components of the brain, they're part of it is like the nerve cells, right? So the nerve cells, the structure of it is like it has the cell body and the appendages that's called dendrites, and the other long one that's called axon. So usually nerve cells conduct signals within each other, within itself and between each other. The nerve signals come from like inside the cell body, and then it gets transmitted as electrical conductions along the process that's called the axon, the long one, right? How well your nerve conductions can travel depends on a few things. Well, first of all, it is an electrical signal. So if you have a lot of dirty electricity around you, that can potentially mess up this process because the entire nervous system works based on the electrical signal. Right? Another thing is that the axon is like an electrical wire, right? It has the insulation layer around it, which is called myelin sheath. And the signal jumps between myelin sheath. So the myelin sheath is made with fat and phospholipids. So if the myelin sheath, the health of the myelin sheath isn't good, then that can potentially destroy this signal conduction process. And then in between the nerve cells, right, one cell communicates with another cell at the junction that is called synapses. And between the synapse, it secretes the first cell secretes the neurotransmitters, the chemicals that are called neurotransmitters, into the second cell. Right? So there are examples of neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, GABA, acetylcholine, and glutamate, for example. So some of these, like serotonin and GABA, are inhibitory. So that means they can make you a little more mellow, but the rest of these are more excitatory. So you need this to function in like day-to-day life, in short. And another thing is that the hormones and neurotransmitters, they work based on molecular sex. So how well these neurotransmitters function is depending on how well it binds to the receptor on the cell, the second cell, the postsynaptic cell, and how well it transmits next to in the second cell. So that's one thing. And another thing is that after this conduction happens, and these neurochemicals, neurotransmitters have to be destroyed effectively. So these are all the factors that affect how well your nerve cells work. Right? So once I define, now that I define what neurotransmitters are, I'm going to get into depression and anxiety. The conventional medical system at the moment is extremely heavily dependent on the pharmaceutical industry, right? Very likely that when doctors graduate from medical school, a lot of them are educated by the pharmaceutical reps, and like they talk about drugs and why they should use it and whatnot. So the problem is that they just end up assuming that only one neurotransmitter, which is serotonin, is imbalanced, which is or is too low, and all the drugs try to increase it, which is a problem. And that's why a lot of people who use the antidepressants don't find that it works really well. And also this mother ignores everything else. The doctor has never asked about what you're eating or how well you're sleeping. Maybe they do ask how well you're sleeping and just give you a sleeping pill, but it doesn't really resolve whatever else that is contributing to the problem. A lot of times these diseases are diagnosed in a 3 to 6 minutes appointments, and there's no diagnostic testing in any kind of psychiatric conditions. And very interestingly, many studies show that placebos are as effective as medications. So the big business of selling antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs are actually very, very flawed. And the last point is that a lot of times exercise may be more effective than medications because it helps rebalancing the brain. So this is very interesting, and I totally feel you that the fact that you are on this webinar means that you are trying to find a way out and you're trying to be an educated consumer, right? So I found this review article that I will actually send you after this webinar. So there's a few very interesting quotes from very big figures in psychiatry. Number one is like, We have hunted for big simple neurochemical explanations for psychotic disorders, and we have not found them. This is by Dr. Kenneth Kendler, and he's our co-editor-in-chief of psychological medicine. And Dr. Joseph Glenn-Mullen also wrote that a serotonin deficiency for depression has not been found. But interestingly, all these antidepressants aim at increasing serotonin. Right? So there are other technologies that allows for testing these neurotransmitters in a less invasive manner. And most people, when they have some symptoms of brain imbalances, there are more than serotonin at play. For example, this lady, she's 51-year-old with a lot of pain and a lot of anxiety. And with this test, we found that she has low serotonin. Dopamine is normal, but it's on the high side. Low epinephrine, super high norepinephrine, which totally makes sense when norepinephrine to epinephrine ratio is more than 5. That usually leads to anxiety. Yeah. And GABA is also really high because it's trying to compensate for serotonin. So after 3 full months of neurotransmitter support, and by the way, she was supported with all these neurotransmitters and not with just serotonin, and also lifestyle changes, and then they retest. And at the time that she retested, she found that the pain improved and her anxiety resolved, as well as her serotonin increases into the normal range, her dopamine normalizes, her epinephrine also normalizes, same with norepinephrine and GABA. So this is another way of looking at anxiety and depression, right? So this is a 17-year-old male athlete with very poor injury recovery, and he doesn't sleep well. He has mild depression. So when we test this, we found that serotonin is really low as well, but everything else is also low. That means that the brain is extremely depleted. So when neurotransmitters that are supported and their overall health is supported, and after the retest, found that serotonin bounces back up and everything else starts to recover, but it's still not perfect yet. But all of these issues are resolving. So this is just some counterexamples of the way to deal with anxiety and depressions and overall health, right? Okay, so what does the brain need to function well? So number one, it needs the fuel, right? It needs glucose. It needs oxygen. Without oxygen, the brain is the first thing to die. It needs stimulation, so you need to use your brain to keep it alive and active and healthy. Hormones are also important, and it needs to interact with other systems in the body, which we will talk about later. And you also need nutrients to function, right? Amino acids and fats are used to make neurotransmitters. Things like tyrosine is used to make dopamine, for example, and tryptophan is used to make serotonin. So if you have issues with proteins or fats, then you are not going to make good amount of neurotransmitters. And you also need the nutrients to repair and regenerate, and it also has its own immune system. And lastly, you need good blood flow to the brain, because without the blood flow, then you can't have the oxygen, the glucose, and the nutrients, right? Right. So now let's get into the 8 reasons why our brains get imbalanced. Right. So reason number 1 is that your circadian rhythms is out of whack. Right. As you can see in this chart, so this is just to show you that every organism has its life cycle based on the day and night life cycle, including plants and all animals and hormones. Right. So for humans, there are different neurotransmitters and hormones increase and decrease at different times of the day. Like serotonin is higher at night, and cortisol is kind of fluctuates, but it's high in the increases from nighttime. It is high in the morning, and then it decreases at nighttime. So melatonin increases at nighttime, adrenaline increases in the morning. So if you know who you are, so if this is one of you, then that can't sleep until like 2 in the morning and then wake up like really late in the day, and then you're depressed and anxious. So the solution is like to try to shift your circadian rhythm to sleep at a reasonable times and fix your sleep problems and regulate your light exposures. What does that mean? So a lot of us have our circadian rhythms out of whack because you are in front of blue lights, computer screens, and the lights in your house late into the night, and your body perceives that as the sun, perceives it as daytime. So what you can do is, well, you can try to reduce the blue light by creating the red light and installing the F-Lux app to make your screen less blue at night, as well as getting an amber color glasses at nighttime, and then in the morning put your face in the sun or get a blue light machine to expose in the morning. So that actually has been shown to resolve seasonal affective disorders. So it's actually pretty interesting how circadian rhythms and light exposure connects to mood and neurotransmitters. Right? So reason number 2 is blood sugar problems. So a lot of people these days have blood sugar problems because, first of all, because we are stressed. Second of all, because the conventional nutritional recommendations, which is based on the food pyramid on my planet, is ridiculously high in carb, and this is not for everyone. So the problem is that when you have the kind of carbs that your body can't handle, it can slowly increase your insulin in response to that carb. And then when a lot of insulin comes out, can drop your blood glucose really fast. So you have really high and really low blood glucose in a short period of time. It's really bad blood sugar swings, and this is not very good for your brain. Okay. So that's one of the problems is the bad kind of carbs that we have in our diet. And number 2 is that a lot of hormones can raise blood sugar, like cortisol and adrenaline. So if you're stressed and you always feel like adrenaline all the time, that can be a reason why you have blood sugar problems, right? And if you don't sleep well, that can also mess up your blood sugar. And so usually, I used to think that there can be like a one-size-fits-all solution for this. Right? Some practitioners will suggest that everyone who has brain issues should go into a ketogenic diet, but I don't think that's the best one for everyone. Some practitioners say you should eat some proteins and fiber every 3 to 4 hours, or even 2 hours, and that can work for some people. But the best way to do it is, for my clients, I recommend finding a diet that stabilizes your blood sugar by getting a glucometer, and then prick your finger like before and 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour after eating, and see how well this fluctuates, and just play around with how much protein, carb, and fat you need to stabilize your blood sugar, basically, which is kind of challenging, but testing is the way to go for me because I am a scientist. Reason number 3 is inflammation, and there are studies that show that depression is an inflammatory disease. Right? So once you know that depression is an inflammatory issue, then you gotta ask, like, where does the inflammation come from? This is a review article from I think BMC, Biomed Central Medicine, and you can find this. I think you can just PubMed it or Google it, and it's open access, so anyone can go and read this journal article. It's pretty easy to read too. So some people have head trauma or history of concussions, and then other people, or most people, do have some inflammation from diet, infections, obesity, or fat in the belly. That's extremely inflammatory. High oxidative status from being very stressed out or like overexercise, for example, can contribute to depression. Dysbiosis. Remember, the brain communicates with the gut, and a lot of serotonin is made in the gut. So if someone has a lot of bad bacteria in the gut, that can mess up with the serotonin level, and that can on its own cause depression and anxiety. Some people have long-term inflammation from dental problems, and like I said before, stress of any form can be inflammatory, right? Reason number 4 is nutritional deficiency. Well, this is not an entirely nutritional webinar, but I'm going to talk about the common blind spots that people often have that they're not aware of, which could cause anxiety and depression, right? So a lot of people most people eat enough protein in North America, but the thing is that they may have some poor digestion and absorption issues like low stomach acid, especially if you feel really heavy after eating meat or like you burping and belching and all that jazz. That could be an issue with stomach acid. That would mean that you're not absorbing it or assimilating any of the nutrients 100% that you should. So that can lead to issues with amino acids and minerals and vitamins, right? Amino acids, glycine to methionine. So if you eat a lot of muscle meat, especially if you are like a weightlifter or a bodybuilder, that can contribute to depression. And because oh, what did she say? Okay. No. Oops. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, so a lot of people, when they eat a lot of muscle meat, like really lean steak and chicken breast. And by the way, I don't think chicken breast is a healthy food, even though I was a bodybuilder and I ate a lot of it. All right, so these meats have a lot of methionine, and it can cause imbalances with glycine because glycine is used in the biochemical pathways that is used to make neurotransmitters like serotonin. So it's important to balance out the glycine to methionine methionine ratio by eating more proteins that contains more glycine. For example, gelatin, organ meats, and fattier cuts of meat, as well as the leaner cuts of meat, right? Actually, as a matter of fact, the Eskimos, they do eat a lot of meat, right? They don't eat anything else but like whales and blabbers from animals, and they find that when they eat the leaner cut of meat, they feel worse than if they eat the fattier cut of meat. So what they do is they eat the organs and the fatty cuts of meat, and then they throw the lean cuts of meat to the dogs or the animals, which is kind of interesting because that's a completely worse of what we all do these days. And the Eskimos, if they are in their native environments, they don't have heart diseases, obesity, or depression, anxiety. Right? So this is a funny thing to think about. Fats, most people are not getting enough omega-3 fatty acid, especially DHA. So you gotta find a good brand of fish oil that's higher in DHA and supplement that if you have brain imbalances. Cholesterol is an important part of the brain, so you do need enough cholesterol. But I'm not saying that you should have all the high cholesterol, but if your cholesterol is really low or you are on certain drugs, then you should talk to your doctor about getting off these medications via lifestyle. You can. Choline is a very important nutrient as part of their neurotransmitter. It's called acetylcholine, and it's rich in egg yolks, soy or sunflower lecithin, and liver, right? So it's a good nutrient to add. But you could also supplement this, or there are other chemicals that can support the choline pathway if this is the thing that you need, especially if you have concentration issues. Minerals, things like zinc to copper ratios, and I bring this one up because I know most of the women attending these, most of their attendees are women, right? And a lot of women use birth control pills or copper IUD, and that can mess up the zinc to copper ratios. So when you have too much copper from birth control pills or from any other source, that can on its own cause depression. So just a thought, like I would recommend testing if you are on birth control pills or have been on birth control pills or using copper IUD to test for your zinc and copper ratios in one way or the other, and then supplement zinc to balance that out. And then another thing is magnesium to calcium ratio. So most people are low in magnesium, and then there's so many sources of calcium in our foods that we don't have to worry about it. The thing is, too much calcium is not a good thing in a lot of ways. So it's important to make sure that you get enough magnesium and absorb them, right? Vitamins, all of them, especially the B vitamins. So not saying supplements, but we should eat a lot of whole food sources that are rich in B vitamins, like vegetables and liver. And you shouldn't get tested for MTHFR mutations, because if you have an MTHFR mutation, then you might get into trouble when you choose to supplement B vitamins. Right? So that's an important thing to think about. The next point is, for digestion and absorption is an issue, right? Like I said before, stomach acid is extremely important, but if you can potentially have that bacteria H. pylori infection, then do not supplement with the stomach acid. And the gut bacteria and other bugs can also be important, because if you have other bugs in your gut, it's going to steal your food, basically, and then you won't have anything else that, some of these that the brain needs in order to function well. Reason number 5 would be low oxygen levels to the brain. A lot of people are not breathing properly, right? You know that there are some ways to breathe that make you feel more nervous and worse than when you breathe into your tummy. So I recommend belly breathing. Actually, just shot a video for meditation with belly breathing, actually. The thing is, like, interesting enough, if you hyperventilate, you're actually reducing the oxygen levels to the brain. So you have to practice breathing, normal breathing, and belly breathing. Other things that can contribute to this would be inactivity. If you're sedentary, it's good to move, because when you move, then you get more blood flow to the brain. If you have poor circulation for any reason, that can totally mess up the blood flow to the brain. And if your blood pressure is lower than like 110/70, then that might contribute to your brain issue, because you're not getting good enough blood flow to the brain. Okay, this is opening a can of worms, because I love talking about hormones. Reason number 6 is hormone imbalances and misregulation. So both genders have their receptors for hormones in the brain, right? Men have androgen receptor for testosterone in the brain. The same with women have receptors for progesterone and estrogen. We have a lot more of these. So that's why a lot of women get changes of brain function over menopause, because there are major changes in the hormone makeup, right? So I'm just going to share one of my friend's story. So I'm just going to share one of my friend's story. She's a fellow FDN practitioner as well, and she did the same protocol. So she said she started with severe fatigue, brain fog, extreme mood swings, aching joints, especially in her lower back, and anxiety. I did all the tests and found that my hormones were really low, melatonin low, high oxidative status, congested liver, gut shutting down, because she was diagnosed with celiac disease about 6 months before, before, but going gluten-free didn't help much. She also had S. pylori and Klebsiella, which is a parasite, and several food sensitivities. I followed the FDN protocol very closely. I also worked very hard at changing my diet, including metabolic typing, monitored her blood sugar, really working on sleep and external stressors, even though she had 3 kids, and stress reduction. Oops. Okay, what did I do? Hold on. Oh. What did I do? Oh, okay. So she said that when her hormones improved, then her anxiety went away, and then she no longer experienced the mood swings. And then a year into these protocols of trying to figure out what else is going wrong with her problems, with her health, then she became pregnant again. Oh. Did something just crash? Okay. Oh. Oops. Oh, cool. All right. Okay, so the reason another hormones that can really affect the brain is cortisol, right? That's because the brain has receptors for our hormones as feedback and stimulations. The brain makes the hormones that causes your adrenals to make cortisol, and then cortisol go back and get a feedback to the brain. The thing is that if cortisol is a catabolic hormone, right, it means it destroys. So if you have too high cortisol over time, it's going to destroy the brain. So that is not a good thing. That is why it is important to regulate stress. Reason number 7 is digestive malfunction. So I got this image from Nature, the magazine, the journal. So it says that the brain has neuronal connections to the gut, and then the gut communicates with the microbiome, which are basically the bacteria, that also communicates with the neurons and the neurons in the immune cell. So what happens is that if you have too many bad bacteria, then that can contribute to too low neurotransmitters of some sort, especially because a lot of the serotonin and melatonin are made in the gut, up to 80% of them, right? So if you ever wonder why serotonin is often low in people with anxiety and depression, that's usually because of something in the gut. So it's as simple as that, right? So digestive malfunction is the major reason why people can have anxiety and depression. And as a matter of fact, I actually have never seen anyone with anxiety or depression without gut issues. It's interesting. Okay. The last reason is toxicity. So the toxins enter to our body through breathing, applying stuff to the skin and through eating, right? And maybe through other ways as well. So it goes to the liver, right? And then the liver tries to eliminate this through the skin, the hair, the kidneys, and the colons and the lungs. And also, if it doesn't do well, then the excess toxin can get stored in the fat cell, the bone marrow, the liver, and the brain. There's the nervous system, because toxins likes to be in the fat cells, and a lot of the brain is fat. It's just a big blob of fat. And also the joints and the blood and everything. So it can contribute to inflammatory symptoms and toxic symptoms of any sort, including anxiety and depression, because anxiety and depression are inflammatory issues, right? These toxins can be heavy metal, and usually if you have heavy metal, it's because you're not toxin well. Some people have yeast, pathogens, or parasite infections, and when these things live in your body, they generate waste, right? And the waste can mess up your brain, right? And very simply, there's actually a news of this guy who has consistently high alcohol in his system, and he tried to convince the police that he didn't drink at all when he drove, and they found out he has a big blob of yeast in his system, and the yeast just produce enough alcohol to intoxicate him constantly. So that's very interesting, and that's a way to save money on alcohol if you like to be buzzed. By any chance, if some people have poor liver detoxification because they're overtoxic, or some people can be genetically bad at liver detoxification. And lastly, if you are overloaded with toxins in your environment, that can be a problem, and it can mess up your brain. That will mess up anything. If you're weak, like, it can mess up your skin, it can mess up your immune system, and it can mess up your brain, depending on where you're weak in your body, right? So let's talk about evolved medicine. So I like to talk about individualized medicine because as a scientist, I know that the brain doesn't simply imbalance, right? It's the human body is extremely good at resilience and repairing itself. So we gotta ask the question why. That's what scientists do. What happens and why? Why the brain is imbalanced? Like, what damage is already done, right? And then when the damage is already done, because the brain stops dividing, the brain cells stop dividing at age 5. So understand, if you're more than age 5, sometimes the brain is, the term is called plastic, neuronal plasticity. The brain is flexible enough to find a way to compensate for damage that's already done, right? And you can support that process by fixing the 8 causes that I mentioned in the previous slides in this presentation, or you can help and replace them by supporting it, right? One way to replace that is using neurotransmitter testing. So you can do the blood or the urine or the saliva, but I prefer the blood because it's the best representative based on the different research that shows it's the best representative of the snapshot of how your neurotransmitter status is. And interesting enough to find that 86% of Americans are deficient in neurotransmitters. So most of us do have some symptoms of brain malfunctions. Right? It doesn't have to be exactly anxiety and depression, but that's definitely increasing. Some people can recover spontaneously by removing the major one of the 8 factors. So you gotta identify which one it is. And then they find that you can recover faster if you directly support those neurotransmitter levels in a lab-based manner, especially symptom-wise. So you find that anxiety and depression resolve with the proper neurotransmitter support as opposed to using antidepressants. And there's another one danger of antidepressant is that it changes your brain permanently, even though you have gone off it for like 10 years. And when you are on the medication, you have to talk to your doctor if you want to get off of it, right? Because you need to titrate the doses off with 5-HTP with a doctor who is experienced with getting people off. But the problem is most doctors know how to get people on, but they don't know how to get people off of their psychiatric medications, which is a problem because most people that I know, actually everyone that I know, I probably know about 100 of them that have anxiety or depression, get off of these medications without talking to their doctors and just get off of it. And I just, like, for the life of me, could not convince them to talk to their doctor properly. So this is interesting. So if you're on medications or you're on this webinar, please talk to your doctor or find a doctor that know how to help you get off these medications before you actually get off them, right? Okay, so one more case study. So this is a real client of mine. She's a 33-year-old female with anxiety and very bad panic attacks, brain fog. She just could not concentrate. She's really tired all the time and she can't sleep properly, and she's also losing weight that she doesn't need to lose. So the neurotransmitter test shows that she has low serotonin and she has very high dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. The norepinephrine to epinephrine ratio is already it's kind of high, but it's not higher than our range. GABA is super high. Histamine is on the high side. Glutamate is normal. Creatinine is in range. So you can see serotonin is low, which is a pretty common one. Serotonin is inhibitory to the brain, and then what happens when I think the serotonin is low, like I said in the last slide, is because of the bad bacteria in the digestive system, right? Because that interacts with the cells that make serotonin. And then GABA is increased in the brain in order to compensate for that. Also that epinephrine and norepinephrine and histamines are chemicals that are called catecholamines, which responds to inflammation. So it means that she is inflamed. So that's another thing to look at. And then her dopamine is very, very high. So everything else is just totally explains why she has anxiety and panic attacks and all of these symptoms of poor brain function. Right? So, but then aside from replacing, so we can replace, right? We can replace serotonin, but that is not what I do because I'm not a medical doctor to test have lab results. What I do is I look deeper at things. So I know that she's inflamed and she has some stress in her body. So there's another lab test that I want to show you. So cortisol, we test for adrenal stress index and then find out her cortisol is extremely low. Right? Her total cortisol is really low. Her DHEA is also really low. So her adrenals are, you can say her adrenal levels are like shut down. So that explains why the brain is not functioning well as well, because the brain has cortisol receptors, right? So if the cortisol is really low, then it doesn't have enough stimulation to work well. And her estrogen is super low as well. So estrogen stimulates the brain in women, and for men is testosterone. So that explains why she has some degree of anxiety. Her melatonin is low. So when melatonin is low, this is an indicator that the gut is malfunctioned. So I did further tests on her and I found that she has some yeast infections and some severe leaky gut. So I helped her on that, and her, like pretty much right away as she get on the neurotransmitter support, then she feels better, she's sleeping better, her anxiety is getting better, and then we're still working on everything else that did the damage in the first place, which are the yeast infection and the leaky gut, as well as poor detoxification. Right, so just to recap, so there are 8 causes of brain imbalance here. Number 1 is circadian rhythm. So if you're not sleeping at the right time and you're not exposed to light, natural light during the day, that's not a good thing for your brain. Number 2 is blood sugar. So if you're eating too much bad carbs or overstress, right? A good sign of that is that if you feel sleepy after you eat, so that's a sign that you have poor blood sugar issues. Inflammation. This is kind of like a big term here because that happens to a lot of us. Nutritional deficiencies as well. So you gotta make sure that your nutrition is optimum. Oxygen. So gotta practice the proper breathing and exercise and making sure that your circulation works well. Hormones is a big topic for hormone balancing. So I love to test because I am a scientist to see exactly what is going on. And but rather than using hormone replacement therapy, since I am not a licensed doctor, I don't do hormone replacement therapy. But what I do is I support all the systems. And when everything is functioning well, you have really good expectations that everything will function well, right? Digestive malfunction is a big contributor of brain imbalances also, so we gotta support that as well. It also connects to everything, right? The hormones, the nutritional deficiency, the inflammation, the blood sugar, and the circadian rhythms, because most melatonin is made in the gut. And lastly is toxicity and detoxification. So, are you ready to take action? So now, okay. So now that you know, what could be happening. So, is this eye-opening, or is this like a big surprise to any of you? Are you ready to take action? Right. So, those of you who attend tonight, I have a gift for you. Like, everyone is going to get the neurotransmitter questionnaire. It's going to tell you how a few of your neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, are out of whack, and it's going to be a very good indicator of how well your brain, or how badly your brain is out of balance, and whether the neurotransmitter testing would be a great option for you to help rebalance your brain. And I will pick 3 of you who send back the neurotransmitter questionnaires to me to interpret and give you some recommendations as to how you can build your health to overcome anxiety and depression. So you gotta identify which of these things are the major causes, right? But the problem is you don't know what you don't know. So the best way to really untangle this is to test and do detective work. So I have a package for everyone who's attending tonight, that their neurotransmitter testing package, which will really tell you what your brain imbalances is and how effective the treatments that you're using is. So you can also use it on top of their whatever medications you're testing as well. There are ways to integrate that, right? So the package for neurotransmitter testing and a full month of coaching would be $447 for tonight. Right, so now I will take questions. Oh. Oh. Okay, window. So. Oh. Oh. Mm.